Hello, what is up YouTube? My name's the Jester, and I wanted to create this channel to basically just create an in-depth Overwatch guide that doesn't like I want to make an Overwatch guide that is informed and with no bias. Now, there's a lot of Overwatch guides out there, and don't get me wrong, these guys, they know what works and they know what they're doing, like what's in the top 100, PMs. But I've noticed that a lot of them just blatantly refuse to acknowledge that counters yeah, and I just wanted to make an in-depth guide. I don't know everything about the game, I'm still learning about the game, even after my years playing it. But yeah, I just really love this game, and I just want to make a sick in-depth guide. So, yeah, to begin with, like, just a little background on me. I've got thousands of hours on this game, literally. I plateaued at Plat 1, and I play on PlayStation, so I'm a console player. Yeah, so obviously, I'm not GM or anything, but you don't have to be GM to analyze the game or the ability or how to demonstrate how they counter each other, you know what I mean? Like, you don't need to be good at the game to basically learn strategy behind it, and be a strategist or coach. All you have to do is understand the concepts of the game and how it works, and yeah, that's what I like to do. So, yeah, I'm just in the practice range at the moment. I got banned from my last season of comp, season 8 of Overwatch 2. That's just because in the new place I'm staying at, the electricity kept short-circuiting, so I was getting DC'd for my gun. Like, I didn't do it deliberately, so it was like, fair enough, I got banned. But yeah, so basically, instead of playing comp, I've been just improving my aim, improving my skills, gaining game knowledge, and I'm actually like really enjoying just doing it. So I figured, why not make a YouTube channel, and you know, share what I'm learning. That's the thing. I still don't know. Obviously, like, we're all just human. We don't know everything, but that's the goal, is to end up knowing, like, literally every minute detail of the game, so I can make an absolutely perfect guide. And I've already, like, got a lot of base knowledge of the game, just with hours of experience. And yeah, I really want to improve it from here and I want to make like very in-depth guides, not just like this is how you play Genji, you know, throw your shurikens, then dash in, then dash melee combo. You know, I don't want like just basic guides, I want like in-depth guides, particularly if it will be related to maps. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. I just want to, there'll be a lot of the time, it will be me explaining offensive heroes, defensive heroes, and how they take map space or how they control map space. Because that's 99% of what Overwatch actually is fighting to take map space and fighting to deny map space and to cut out space. That's actually what pretty much the game is. And you use your heroes to accomplish it. Yeah. So I don't know if you guys know what a poke, brawl, and a dive is, but it's this lingo for how team comps synergize and work together. For example, brawl would be heroes like Reinhardt, Junker Queen, Reaper, very short-range damage heroes walking forward together, and like taking map space forcefully from the front line. And then dive would be heroes like Winston, Genji, and Tracer, poking heroes from afar and then all collapsing in on one target that's either isolated or vulnerable. So that's dive, that's what people call dive at least. And then poke would be heroes like Zenyatta, I guess even heroes like McCree, any hero with long range damage is what's considered a poke hero. Poke from the corner and you try to kill them from the corner. And that's been like pretty much how everyone sees the game for quite some time now. And it was just annoying me because I could tell that it wasn't... Don't get me wrong, these strategies work. They work very well. And it's easy to understand, easy to communicate what you're trying to do. But it's not how the designers of the game actually want the game to be played. The game developers, they have something very clear in mind when they are creating the game. And yeah, so I wanted to like explain to the community what the game developers want you to play the game like, and what they're trying to make the game like. Because there's a lot of misunderstanding out there about what counters are, if counters even exist in the first place. And they definitely do, but people just, especially in the top 500 in GM, they don't understand that they, even though they are very good at the game, I don't think they understand that because they've accomplished so much, their ego begins to get in the way of their judgment, and like, don't get me wrong, they're top 500, they know what they're doing, and they're doing it right, and it's working, right? Like their team strategies, the poke, brawl, dive strategy, what they're doing is like working. So because it works, they get like an ego behind them, and then they start believing things that aren't necessarily true, especially in like the heat of the game and being emotional, you know, we're all human. But yeah, so I'm a massive, I used to be a Hanzo member, and I'm a massive fan of Arge. Arge is Finnish, the best Hanzo in the world, basically, Finnish. And he has gotten so much hatred and like so much confidence with Hanzo because he's not playing, he's never played the way Grandmasters or top 500 expect you to play. And they expect you to play it because once they reach these ranks, I don't mean to be rude or anything, but it's just human nature. They get an ego like from hitting their rank, which is obviously fair enough. But they get blinded by it. So like, I'm not saying what they're doing or what they say is like bad advice or wrong. I'm just saying they're not actually analysing the game and giving optimal advice for each hero. They're just saying what works, what team strategies are working for them. You know what I mean? Yeah, in any case, Arge, huge fan of him, been a fan of him since like literally the first season of Overwatch. And he plays Hanzo in a way that all the top 500 players screech at. Basically, they just think it's wrong because it's not the way they like it. And that's why I say like their ego gets in the way of their better thoughts. Because the way he plays the hero is very unconventional. He doesn't hold long lines of sight corners. He hides a lot and then peeks around a corner to assassinate someone. And he just does. He tries to shoot at heroes that are unaware that he's there. And yeah, in the upper echelons of Overwatch, they don't do control space together, and they don't really hide. They just control space and they hit their shots, and that's how the game starts. So he's gotten Igo's gotten a lot of hatred for like playing the hero in this assassin. He calls it an assassin playstyle, and it really dumbfounds me that he gets hatred because the more I learn the game, the more I realise that he's actually playing the game right. That's why he's able to reach top 500 on multiple anonymously named accounts. But they just don't like the fact that he can do it playing in a way that they don't approve of. And it's quite childish, really. I don't actually, like, this may sound very egoistic or whatever, or narcissistic, but I don't really care. But I don't actually think a lot of top 500 GMs and streamers actually like what the game is. Like, I feel like they like winning, and they like winning on the heroes that they like in the way that they like. You know what I mean? I don't actually think they like the way the game is designed. And the most notorious for it are projectile heroes. Everyone, especially in the upper echelons, even in plat, diamond, even in the lower ranks, people hate these heroes. Heroes like Junkrat, Hanzo, Mei, Torbjorn, any heroes that are projectile heroes are just being RNG and apparently no skill, since, you know, it's just luck that they land their shots. But that's like actually what a part of the game is the fact that it's difficult to land shots from projectiles and there is luck as a factor. And that's what makes the game fun. Because projectile heroes, they do a lot of damage if you land the shot. You know what I mean? So it feels like, so when they die to heroes like this, if they die to Junkrat Spam or a Hanzo Arrow or a Torbjorn or a Mei Icicle, whenever they die to heroes like that from across the map, they feel like they've been robbed of the fight. They feel like it's unfair for some reason. They feel like it takes no skill, even though it takes actually more skill, arguably. And yeah, I just feel like a lot of the pros, they always come from games like Valorant, CS:GO, Apex Legends, or COD, and in a lot of these games, they're just hit-scan heroes where you have to have good aiming mechanics. So they only want to play hit-scan heroes, looking at you, Metro, or like, yeah, that's pretty much it. They only want to play heroes where as soon as you click on them, they take damage, so it feels like it's a fair duel. And like, if you are playing Soldier or something, and say you're walking like down here, down this corridor, and you get pelted in the head with a Hanzo arrow, for some reason they feel like they get robbed, and like, that it's RNG, it takes no skill to do it, but like, if that was the case, then you wouldn't have died to it. Do you know what I mean? Like, you would have just shot him while dodging his shot, if it's so easy. But like, the fact that they land the shot takes skill, but they don't want to ignore it. So, and I'm not saying everyone, obviously there are people in top 500 that are, you know, and streamers that are chill and like get to understand that the game's not all about them. It's not their choice how it works. Like, and that's cool. That's whatever. But moral of the story is, I wanted to show the community how the developers of the game want you to play it. Because if you understand how the developers want you to play it, I think that the gameplay experience could really be something even more special, especially if we implemented these strats as a team, or just you implemented the strats as a team. I think you'd find a lot more success in your games too, because you'd be getting more value out of the heroes that you put. Without further ado, I guess I'll go over the basics of what I believe counters are actually, because some people say counters don't exist because you can just get top 500 with good aim and good mechanics and good positioning. But to me, that's just the biggest load of hogwash I've ever heard, because you're just getting to these higher ranks because of your better aim, and 2, your better game sense. That has nothing to do with the fact that heroes counter other heroes. It doesn't matter like how good you are at, say, Genji, right? At the end of the day, if someone at the same skill level as you is playing Winston, they'll be able to peel you from the team over and over again, and there's nothing you can do. Like that's the key word, is the same skill level, because like at low skill levels, people will just be making positioning mistakes, target priority mistakes, and who knows how many other mistakes. Which is why it just annoyed me that, like he said, there's no such thing as counters, you just have to climb. Like, you can climb the top 500 with any hero, which is true, you can, but that doesn't change the fact that there aren't counters. That just means that the community isn't good enough at the game to play it properly. And that's like, you know, that's just a brutal reality. Like, you know, people aren't good enough at the game to actually play it correctly. And I would argue that this goes all the way up to GM and top 500. I might say that, I guess. It definitely applies to the medal race. Bronze, silver, gold, plat, they definitely aren't playing the game correctly. Plat, you start to, but not to the extent that developers want you to. Because it is supposed to be a team game at the end of the day. And if you work as a team, you'll always climb higher than if you don't work as a team. Yeah, really. And that's pretty much it. Without further ado, I'll go over how I think counters actually work in this game, because I think there are way too many misunderstandings. So there are 2 types of heroes in this game. We'll go to the heroes. There are offensive heroes that take away map space from the enemy, and then there are defensive heroes who control and deny map space from the enemy. So, if we look at the tanks, which is where we'll start off with, because I have been playing nothing but tanks in Overwatch 2. In Overwatch 1, I started playing Soldier recently, but that was only recently while I was trying to regain my aim. In Overwatch 1, I was a Hanzo one-trick, and that was the only hero I could play, and I was so frustrated at Genji and Winston's and Pharah's, because I thought the heroes were broken, which just isn't true, because the fact of the matter is they just countered me. Which, you know, top 500s will say counters don't exist, which is a bunch of hogwash, they do. Otherwise the game wouldn't be fun if counters weren't in it. That's the thing, like, you want the game to have counters. If the game doesn't have hard counters, the game isn't fun anymore, because that's just what makes the game fun. That's why people come back to it. It's not like Call of Duty or any other game. It's like Team Fortress or Team Fortress 2, but just like a, you know, more advanced version of it, basically. Yeah, so without further ado, I've devised this way, and I'm sure like top 5, like lots of people know this, don't get me wrong, but this is just educational, so gotta start from the basics. I think that the 4 types of heroes are offensive dive heroes, like Diva, Doomfist, Winston and Hammond. And what makes them offensive and diving is their ability to jump vertically, or fly vertically, or grapple vertically from the low ground to the high ground. That's what makes them a dive tank, or a dive damage dealer, or a dive support. Doesn't matter which role it is, it's still the same concept. That's one of the 2 offensive types of heroes. The second offensive type is what I call it a rush type. So these heroes rush forward with a movement ability that increases their speed, like for example Junker Queen's Shout, Malga's Charge, Orissa's Twirl technically, Reinhardt's Charge. These are all movement abilities that help the hero get from one corner to another, but along the horizontal path. So you can't pin to the high ground, you can't shout to the high ground, you can't charge to the high ground, and you can't twirl to the high ground. So that's what makes them offensive rush heroes. Now, there's 2 defensive heroes, which I think counter the offensive heroes, which I'll explain why at the end. So for the defensive tanks, we have Ramutra, we have Roadhog, we have Sigma, and we have Zaya. And what all these tanks have in common is that they have no or very, very limited mobility. Because technically Ramutra has some mobility, but extremely limited. So to start with, we'll go over what the defensive projectile tanks are. So the 2 defensive categories are defensive projectile and defensive hit scan. Projectile being weapons that when you fire them, they take time to reach the target. So there's a delay before you do damage. So yeah, these 2 tanks are Ramutra and Sigma. There's only 2 of them. And so what these tanks do, because they have no mobility, to make up for their lack of mobility, they have increased damage per second with their projectiles. Yeah, basically. So Ramutra, he does a lot of damage with this gun, but only under the condition that he lands the shot. So it feels like you're never doing damage with it, especially if you're like shooting at a fire in the air. But technically speaking, if you land all your shots with these projectile weapons, they do a lot more damage at a range than their hit scan counterparts. Plus, they have abilities like this, with shot, which do a heap of damage, and to multiple targets at once. So, yeah, they do a lot of damage, but they can't. Yeah, so that's Ramutra and Sigma. So yes, they have no mobility, and they fire projectiles. And as you know, if you fire a projectile, it's easy to hit a target. There's a Pharaoh, an Echo, a Genji, a Doom. It's hard to hit them because they're moving all out throughout the air direction. And the last category is defensive hit scan. And Roadhog, this was actually very difficult for me to figure out because I thought Roadhog was defensive projectile tank to begin with, because technically speaking, he has a projectile weapon. His hook's projectile. But that's not what he's actually designed to do, which I'm going to have to explain more in depth later, which I'll explain at the end. But technically, just think of him as a unique hit scan tank with a unique hit scan tank, because he's very good at hooking Pharahs, he's very good at hooking Echoes, and very good at hooking, say, Divas, Doomfist. He counters them very hard, but he doesn't counter heroes like Mauga or Orisa at all. Even though he has a projectile, like it doesn't do the damage. His projectile doesn't do the damage necessary to put any pressure on them as they approach. That's basically what it is. And Zaya is the last hit scan. Even though she has a beam, she's like Symmetra. She has to track with her weapon, which is what makes a hit scan. When she presses the button, it does instant damage. It doesn't take time to travel. It's self-explanatory. So she's in the hit scan category of tank. Yeah, so now that we've got every tank labelled, let me explain how they counter each other. And this will make more sense when I go to a map, because I know like what I'm saying right now sounds like ridiculous, like saying things like Roadhog, you know, is just, you know, I know it sounds stupid sort of at the moment saying like this, but it'll make more sense when I go to a map and explain why I think they counter each other. So dive tanks like Diva, Doomfist, Winston, and Hammond, and all dive heroes, they counter projectile, defensive projectile tanks and heroes, like Ramatra and Sigma. The reason being is quite simple. It is hard to land your projectiles on a vertically moving target, and that's pretty much all there is to it. It's hard to land their projectiles on them, so they don't actually get much damage output from their weapons because they miss. I can explain that in detail further later, how dive and rush, you know, dodge, but they won't miss as many shots on these four tanks, Diva, Doom, Winston, and Hammond, as they will on... Oh, fucking hell, that was... Someone's caught in my foot. God damn, what was that? I do not know, but goddamn, that's going to creep me out for a while. I think it was a fucking spider. Anyway. So, where was I? Oh, that's right, I was up to the dive and defensive projectile tanks. Yes, the dive tanks counter the defensive projectile tanks because they can't hit the shots on them. But the defensive projectile tanks, they can consistently as well hit their headshots, or just their shots in general, on Junker Queen, Mauga, and Orisa. As well as, sorry, and Reinhardt as well. That's the... always forget that one. If a Mauga shouts and runs towards a Ramatra or Sigma, it's very easy to damage them and not miss the projectile. If Mauga charges towards them, it's very easy to damage them as they're charging towards. If Orisa twirls towards, it's very easy to headshot her as she twirls towards, even though the twirl will eat it, but won't eat a... For example, the twirl won't eat a rock, the rock will be easy to land. Same with Ryan, while he's pinning, very easy to rock him, very easy to headshot him with a projectile weapon. So as they come towards these heroes, they take a lot of damage. So by the time they are at the hero, they've already taken a lot of damage. Whereas with dive heroes, they would take barely any because around 80% of the shots would miss, or quite a large amount of the shots would just simply miss them. Like Hammond, Winston, Diva, Doom. They just dodge them as they approach, basically. Yeah, so that's why dive counters... So offensive dive heroes counter defensive projectile heroes. Now, defensive projectile heroes counter offensive rush heroes, like Junker Queen, Malga, Orisa, Ryan. So who does offensive rush heroes counter? Well, offensive rush heroes, they counter defensive hit scan heroes. Now, this is Roadhog and Xayah. Why do they counter them? This I'm definitely going to have to go explain this later because this will sound silly as well while I'm saying it like this. But Roadhog and Xayah, because they are hit scan, they do less damage than their projectile counterparts, and they have less health because they're designed to stop a dive. You need a high amount of damage to stop Junker Queen, to stop Malga, and to stop Orisa coming forward and Reinhardt, because of all their armor and shield as they approach and their abilities. Malga's self-healing, Orisa's fortify, Queen's shout's probably the weakest, and Ryan's shield, which is probably also the weakest. But technically, their shout and overhealth from shout and Ryan's shield does make them more sustainable. Roadhog, right? He can't output enough damage against these 4 heroes. And we'll go over. I know he can with Ryan. Like, I know that's very obvious. I know even in Junker Queens you'll say like, oh, but he can with Junker Queen, but that's not because of the way the heroes. That's because of other factors in taking into consideration with how they counter each other. That's not to do with his health pool and the way he's moving. That's more so to do with Reinhardt's, basically his role, which is as an anti-DPS tank. Reinhardt is not an anti-tank tank. He doesn't want to be in front of a tank in the first place, which I'll be able to explain later on in the series. And it's the same with Winston. They don't do much damage, and they're not supposed to do damage to tanks. That's not what they're designed to do, but I can go over that later. But for the purposes of explaining these are like the 4 core fundamentals of how counters actually work in the game. That's why, even though it won't sound appropriate with matchups at times, like, I don't take it too seriously because we're just creating a general rule of how counters work. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. And it will make sense, especially once I go to a map like Numbani or the practice range. Especially if it'd be good if I need someone to be in the game with me so I can explain it with them. Because I need a dummy to be an enemy so I can like give an example of why this counters this. So what are we up to? That's right, we were up to how offensive rush tanks counter defensive hit scan. So, 2 things. They can't do enough damage as they approach to a close distance, and once they're at a close distance, they have too much health for them to do anything about it. So if they close the distance, as Junker Queen, Malga, Orisa, or Ryan, I know Ryan's a silly one, but it's still relevant, they can't shred them in time. They don't do enough damage per second with their hit scan weapons. Because the trade-off for hit scan, or the idea behind the trade-off for hit scan, is that you do less damage per second. That's why Hanzo charges his bow quicker than Widow. That's why, let me just think of another example. That's why Torbjorn, when he hits his headshots, I will have to see to confirm this, but I'm pretty certain he does more damage per second than Bastion, who's his counterpart. But again, it's dependent upon him hitting his headshots with his overdrive. In Bastion's turret form, yes, it does a fuck ton of damage, but the idea is like the trade-off for using a projectile weapon that's hard to hit is that if you land all your shots, you do more damage per second. That's what the game designers are trying to accomplish with the game. That's why people hate projectile hitters, which I just assume those people don't actually like Overwatch, to be honest with you, because it's part of the game. In any case, yeah, and that's pretty much all there is to it. And all that's left is defensive hit scan. Who's this defensive hit scan counter? Defensive hit scan counters dive tanks. So Roadhog and Xayah, they both counter D.Va super well, by the way, but they counter D.Va, Doomfist, Hammond, and Winston. And this is where it will start to make sense that they counter dive and not rush, especially Roadhog, who is obviously a hard one to figure out. Roadhog can hook through D.Va's defense matrix, and the hook stops their dive. It interrupts their dive so that they cannot burst down any 200 HP hero behind you. That's the same applies with Doomfist. If he hooks him, he can't burst down any of his heroes. Same applies with Hammond, same applies with Winston. He hooks and interrupts their dive so that your team can't die. That's what he does. Xayah doesn't interrupt the dive with a hook or a movement ability. Xayah is designed to bubble the person who's getting domed. So if the D.Va, the Doom, the Winston, or a Hammond say they dive your friendly soldier next to you, if you bubble the soldier and they do their burst damage onto your bubble, they will just charge you. So they have one of two options. Don't do any damage at the end of their dive, which makes them basically... So there's two options here, is charge, you get charged from it, which makes you do more damage and your teammate doesn't die. Or they wait out the bubble, and for the 2 seconds that the bubble is up, they're just out of position. And they just take damage while being out of position. So either way, she counters dive very well. As long as you don't use your bubble selfishly and you actually wait for the dive to happen. She sort of just like catches them out of position with her ability. Roadhog interrupts, she mitigates the damage, basically. That's the only difference. And that's why it was hard to figure out what Roadhog, whether he was hit scan or projectile, because his weapon is technically a projectile, but it's a very fast projectile, and it's mainly designed to, like, stop these 4 tanks here. So yeah, that's how it works. So to go over one more time, so that you understand the basic concept of counterplay in Overwatch, it goes as follows. Offensive dive heroes counter defensive projectile heroes, who counter themselves offensive rush heroes, who counter themselves defensive hit scan heroes, who counter themselves offensive dive heroes. So it goes in a cycle, and they all counter each other in a cycle. That is the baseline rule of countering in Overwatch. If you can understand that's the baseline, you will begin to understand that even though heroes like D.Va, for example, a D.Va counters a Bastion, correct? I think everyone would agree on that. A D.Va counters Bastion, right? She can fly in, burst them down, and eat and mitigate his damage with her defense matrix. But here's the thing. It's not the fact that Bastion is a defensive hit scan. Technically speaking, following this general rule, he counters D.Va. So it doesn't make sense, does it? Well, here's the thing. It's not Bastion does counter D.Va, because when D.Va flies, and she's difficult to hit, his hit scan weapon counters her mobility. So he can shoot at her from a range and at a close range, and he won't miss his shots. The reason D.Va in this matchup counters Bastion isn't because of the general rule of countering. It's because she has an ability that counters Bastion. So Defense Matrix is a mitigation ability. The damage mitigation ability counters Bastion's damage. It's not that D.Va counters Bastion as a general rule, it's that her Defense Matrix counters his source of damage. So, I just wanted to make that clear. Same with Genji. Genji is a dive hero. He counters Bastion, right? Well, technically speaking, Bastion counters Genji because he's hit scan and will hit all his shots at a range, even though he's moving all over the place. Whereas a Torbjorn will not hit his shots at a range. So, the way to say this is, Genji and D.Va are a perfect counter to the projectile heroes. The projectile hero Torbjorn, which is Bastion's opposite, but projectile, they are a perfect counter because their mobility and their defense matrix and deflect counter the Torbjorn. However, with the Bastion, only their ability counters him. Only their defense matrix or deflect counters him. The mobility doesn't. So, the game will make a lot more sense when you start thinking about it this way. First, you consider the golden rule of what category is the hero? Is it offensive dive, offensive rush, or is it defensive hit scan, defensive projector? Then, after that, you take into consideration abilities that counter each other. But it's like secondary. So, defense matrix and Genji deflect. To make an example of hit scan heroes that completely counter defense matrix and deflect, Xayah can shoot through both of them with her hit scan tracking weapon where you press damage and it instantly applies. Symmetra can do instant damage through their defense matrix and thing, with hit scan. So they can't dodge them and they shoot through it. So these are perfect counters. Xayah and Symmetra, they are perfect counters to D.Va and Genji. Bastion is an imperfect counter. So he's still a counter, but he's imperfect because their abilities counter Bastion. So it actually ends up being the other way around. Does that make sense? Well, I hope it makes sense, because I'm not explaining it again. Well, I will explain it later. But D.Va and Genji against Torb, that is a perfect counter. Because Torb's projectiles can't hit them at a range, and when they close the distance, she can just defense matrix and deflect his shotgun. So he's completely helpless against both of them. Whereas Bastion has a chance at a range. He can still shoot them from a range before they close the distance with their defense matrix or deflect. That's the difference. So Bastion's an imperfect counter, and Torbjorn's a perfect counter. So that goes over all the tanks. This video's been a while, eh? Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. And in my next video, I'll continue on and go through the DPS and support, because I think it's been a while, and you only get an hour to record, so yeah, I'll see you in the next video. like, subscribe, make it go global. I want to just educate people on this. Eventually, I'll put more effort into the videos if it gets more of a following. But yeah. All right. I'll see you later.